So, Annie Layton, we talked a little while ago about invisible women, and you've done some work around invisible women or invisible woman or invisible women syndrome. Tell us about that.
Absolutely. So basically, this whole idea came for me out of my own experience. I was on a team once upon a time, many moons ago, as a member of 8 people on a staff team, and then I left, and my husband and I started our own church. And what happened in that space was all of a sudden I went from being a pastor in my own right to now I am a pastor's wife. And even though we were both co-leading and senior pastors, to use the language, all of a sudden I discovered what it was like to be a pastor's wife. And I noticed I'd go to these gatherings and meetings and I became invisible. And in the past, I'd go in there on my own and I'd be chatting and high-fiving everybody and feeling super confident about who I was. And now I was there at my husband's side and I felt like I just vanished. And I found people not talking to me, only talking to him. I found people sort of looking beyond me. If I would meet someone, they'd ask me straight away about my husband, not about me. And I wasn't used to that because I'd always been there in my own merit. And all of a sudden I became just the wife or arm candy or whatever you want to call it, the invisible other. And it took me a few rounds at these gatherings to recognise this was actually a thing that, hang on a minute, I've gone from being seen to disappearing only because I'm now a pastor's wife.
Yeah. So how long ago was that?
Yeah, so that started about 9 years ago, when we planted our own church and we became co-pastors.
Yeah, so you were co-pastoring.
Yes.
In Melbourne, Victoria, Australia.
Right, yeah.
And how long were you running that community for?
Yeah, so we ran it for about 8.5 years, and the last 2 years of that I ran it by myself. So about 6 years in, we'd also had a business at the same time that was financing the church.
Yes.
The bivocational model. That's how we pay our bills and feed our children.
Tent makers.
The tent makers.
Yes.
So, but about 2 years towards the end of the church, we just decided that viably it was better that he went to full-time work, and I took over the reins on my own. And that wasn't an unfamiliar space to me because I had been a pastor on my own for the 25 years before then, so to speak. So it felt like a good fit for me to just take it on. But even in that space, there were some interesting things that happened. That's for another podcast. But, so I became pastor on my own, then a co-pastor, then back to being a senior pastor by myself. Yeah.
So you got to feel what it was like to be no James, then co-James, and then back to kind of James is left and now we're with you. We're talking past tense because you had what's the proper word to use? Yes, the God, everything finished. He closed the community. It had its season. Yes.
All those things, seasons, chapters, all the words that we just felt it was time to finish up. And we finished well. Everything was really positive and great. And now I'm in this space like yourself, Dave, where we've been sort of in the marketplace or on the sanctuary floor. We've been in the middle of it all.
Yes.
And now we've both been able to step back and have an objective perspective because we're viewing it from outside of those titles.
Yeah.
And so that's why this conversation is important because we've both been in it and out of it. And the perspective's different now. Now that I'm out, I'm looking back and going, there's some things we need to talk about. Yeah.
Because you didn't notice it while you were in there, or you didn't have the language, or maybe you had too much to, like, if you had this conversation a couple of years ago in the midst of it, what might have been the risks? Because the bonus of being outside of this and not having as much skin in the game or so much to lose while you're in the midst of it is there's certain things you won't say because it can cost you bread and butter. This becomes costly. So.
Yeah, so true. Yes. I think I wouldn't say because it would cost me a little bit because I would then be highlighting. I'm actually referencing pastoral networks when I would go to gatherings and conferences. And if I would have spoken up then, I would risk jeopardising relationships, stirring the pot, poking the bear, whatever you want to say, and potentially losing relationships because a lot of what we're going to discuss today, it's done unconsciously. It's a cultural thing. And a lot of beautiful people in those gatherings, conferences, pastors' breakfasts, they don't realise that they do it. So I just didn't feel at the time it was appropriate for me to call it out. And I think now both you and I are in a place where we can, talk about a few things because, we're just in different spaces. There's
perspective changes.
Perspective
and
changes.
You're now. It's not like you kind of stepped aside. You still want to be involved. You still. You're an executive coach now, right? That's what you've studied, and that's the space you've found yourself in now. Tell me about that.
Yeah. So basically, after finishing up, I felt a really burning passion to help leaders in leadership spaces, both genders. And I've studied coaching. I'm studying a postgrad in supervision and things like that, just so I can really have the right tools on top of the many years of sort of just doing it myself and being in the trenches myself. So, my heart really now is to actually coach people in that leadership executive space and just to be a safe person that you can actually totally process with. It goes no further. And I've actually got the privileged position to be able to say, hey, me too. The empathetic space of, I know what you're talking about because I've actually been there.
Yes.
And that's why today you and I are laser focusing into the women's space, but both of our hearts is to speak to both genders. Yep. And this isn't about a bashing men's session either. It's not about pointing the finger at any particular gender.
Yeah,
today's about us.
It's quite hard too, right? That's hard for us because some of the research is looking that I went and did in journal studies, thesis that people put together, people that have been writing on it, and the research that you did qualitatively, getting ready for this and looking into it. It's not as if there's a single problem in a single denomination in a single age group. It's that prevalent that there's yes and no's everywhere, right?
Correct. And I think so. What Dave's referencing is that I did a bit of data research and I asked women from their 60s right through to their 20s about how they experience. So I wondered if I'd made it up. Maybe it's me. Maybe it's all of my issues that I feel invisible. Yeah.
So here's my projection essay.
Exactly. It's all my orphan spirit stuff,
Yeah.
And but I was saddened to actually find out that it's not just me. And that's probably where, in me chatting about this with you today, it's like, you know what, this is still happening. And it's funny because I was looking at some stuff from generations ago when Martin Luther first talked about getting married and how, that was scandalous. And he was smashed. It was in the 1400s or something. And it wasn't until the 1700s. Yeah, that the pastors could actually have a wife. So this whole dynamic of two people in one ministry space it's not unique. It's been going for a very long time. But sadly, we haven't super progressed in some of these eccentricities that sits around two people in one ministry space.
Yeah. Now, I think I probably should add to, you and I aren't here for some theological debate because I think people should be doing their own kind of work.
Yes, correct.
Studying this. But I think it's really important for us to realize that for both men and women, we can come with some very heavily tinted glasses on or some very strong biases, which we might approach scriptures on, say, the submission thing and the equality thing and the equity thing and should women speak in church thing and all the cultural nuances that we may miss. And we're doing this as far as timing goes. We had this John Macarthur and who was that? Beth Moore thing happened a few weeks ago. And, that thing went viral. Some people were pissed, and others, and then it got really nasty on John. It's just, it is an issue. And as soon as it kind of rears its head in anything that smells ugly, a lot of the theologians hop out. And, John and Beth, bless their hearts, they're not heavy theologians. They're pastors and popular preachers, in that Baptist world, which we are so removed from in Australia. For anybody watching this in the USA, you got to understand our culture is is rather different. You speak English, but it's a different language and a different world. So it's still a big thing, as you said, and part of Luther's Reformation was really like, okay, how is this supposed to work, right? How does this look? So conversation's been going on for a long time.
A very long time, absolutely. Yeah.
And we've got to ask ourselves in this day, I mean, particularly around what you're saying today, is why do women feel invisible? Can you tell me about some of the research, some of the findings, the good, the bad, and the ugly of that, without the detail, of course, because it was all done in privacy. But tell me about why you did that, the sort of questions you asked, and what you found.
Yeah, well, I did it, as I said, to quantify that what I was bringing to the table was accurate, and I think sadly it was. I had expected the women in their 60s, 50s, and 40s to perhaps have, experienced that you're just the wife thing, which was said to a lot of them. But as I said, I was saddened to see that it went right through to young women that I interviewed in their 20s. So things that came up,
millennials, Gen
Zs, who we would feel would have the confidence to speak up or not allow themselves to be, treated sounds like even a hard word, just to find themselves in a culture that isn't quite abreast of this issue.
Yeah.
And I think I was just surprised that, the women in their 60s and 50s were passionate. I did this through phone and some of it through email, and there was a lot of exclamation points and lots of chunks of text about.
I know, I read some of them, they're like, hell yeah.
Lots of hell yeahs, and the millennials were like all the friggin' time, so I'm like, okay. There's a lot of sentiment and emotion behind this stuff because part of the invisibility is they're not asked, right? How ironic. So someone's actually said, have you felt invisible? And the fact that I'm even asking you would indicate that, no one's ever bothered to see if you felt invisible before. So yes, they came back with very strong stories and testimonies of being treated poorly.
Yeah.
And a lot of it was around things like, even small things like, we get an invitation, but it's in my husband's name, yet we're both expected to go. I'm not even named on the invitation. Or my husband's asked to do something and he will say, actually, you should ask my wife. She's way better in this space, but they don't ask her. They just ask him.
Yeah.
Other things like someone said to one of the young millennials, from now on, you're no longer your name. You're now your partner's name. So get used to it. And she was like, how have I lost my own name in this? I'm now the partner of or the wife of or such and such's wife.
Yeah. And that's what you experienced in a way, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. And people clamoring to speak to the husband over you. So even if they might meet you, it's like, where's your husband? And I think some of
the irony of this, like James is just not that guy.
Correct.
He's like, hey, look at me. He'd probably be like, don't give me all, that's too much hassle, he's not the guy that would have been after it,
Not at all. And we're in fact, we're the people that sit in the back row of these things, can I just tell you, rightly or wrongly, we're all about the back row.
There's a pastor's gathering, you'll find James and Annie in the back row.
That's it. We're having the deep conversations and just drinking lots and lots of coffee from, that's us. Like we go to these green room things and we always found that culture challenging, to be honest. That's another story. But we would go there and not sit next to the famous people. If anything, we'd sit in the other side of the room from the famous people because we just are about, vulnerable conversations, one-on-one, heart-to-heart. They talk about B2B and H2H, heart-to-heart conversations rather than business-to-business or P2P, We didn't go there to do pastor chat. We went there to do heart chat, heart-to-heart. So therefore, we didn't chase any of that celebrity space or needing to be seen. However, there are people who in their culture do look to people with a pastor badge and tend to want to know them or, in any environment. They want to.
Quite often, right, that pastor's badge is attributed to the masculine.
Yes, it is indeed. Yeah, that's right. And,
So back to the research, we digress as we do.
Yes, sorry.
Tell me what else you found and discovered. What was shock to you? What was not shocking?
Yeah, good point. I think I'm just going to look to my notes so I don't rip off anyone who shared some really good things. People talked about fighting harder to be given opportunities. They felt that their partner was given opportunities straight away, but they felt as a female that they had to fight harder to be given roles. They also felt things like, they'd be asked things like, whose secretary are you when they go to a gathering? And that happened to me a lot. I was an intern pastor quite young, and in those days it was unusual to have women. I was always asked, whose PA are you? Whose secretary are you? So, like... Did
you say, my own?
I did. I was quite, probably slightly hoity-toity in that space, but I, with great passion delivered the fact that I was nobody's pastor. I was there on my own.
Yeah.
And the other interesting thing around this space, and this is...
you mean no one's PA?
Yeah, no one's PA. That's right. Yes, even the language, right? Yes. Yeah, I'm talking about the 80s, so let's fast forward. But one woman I interviewed, she still has that a little bit. So it's obviously, but you're right, whose PA are you?
Yeah.
But the other funny thing in that space, and this is pertinent to kind of, you're not invisible, but people struggle to know how to deal with you, is I found, and another friend I spoke to found that men quite often felt a little bit cautious in speaking to a woman on their own in those meetings.
Yeah, okay.
And it would be, like I'd start talking to a gentleman and they would drop their wife's name every 2 minutes in the conversation and gesture.
Be like this, left hand up.
Make sure you see my ring, Annie, and things like that. And I feel like saying, and here's some honesty, mate, you're not even my type, so just stop. But there's that thing that they get nervous speaking to a female that someone might ascribe an inappropriate, motivation. Yep. And that within itself, it wasn't being invisible, but it was being misunderstood or discounted, that I'm there as a pastor. I'm not there to threaten your masculinity or your marriage. And that did come up in the research as well as in my own experience. Yeah, so that was interesting.
One of the questions I like that you asked and is this one on being pigeonholed for ministry roles. Like, you expect to do the kids ministry or catering or something like that instead of the kind of assumption of a senior role.
Yes, 100%. Pigeonholed, that was definitely a thing. I asked questions around catering, kids church, sort of nursery roles, pastoral care roles.
Yeah.
And pastors' wives felt very much that. One woman said that she felt it was a 2-for-1 deal. So you paid for the husband, but you got the wife free. And as the 2-for-1 deal, she was going to be having all the meetings at her house, doing all the catering and food, running kids' church, doing the pastoral care, doing all the counselling, and she wasn't going to get paid. And one woman shared that she once went to sort of the synod above her, the governance above her, and said, hey, listen, is there any chance I could also be paid? Because this is what I'm doing. And she listed the 20 roles.
Yes.
And they were like, no, not at all. Your husband is the one who's paid. You're expected to do that for free. And she just felt the devaluing of her, the lack of recognition. But she also felt used. Because, I don't know that would happen so much today, but there is still an expectation as the pastor's wife is that you do all the labour-intensive things and all the nurturing things, and also you're making sure that you're looking after your husband at the same time. That's another space too.
Yeah.
So interesting.
It is interesting. I'm thinking of one of my favourite commentators on kind of this space is not a new voice, Dorothy Sayers. Was one of the first women kind of to allow to be great, she graduated from Oxford, but was amongst the first women to kind of really go through graduation. She wrote novels. She was friends with C.S. Lewis. So, she wrote this, I think in the 30s or 40s.
Right.
She said, in reaction to the age-old slogan, so she's already saying this age-old slogan, a woman is the weaker vessel, or still more offensive, the woman is a divine creature. We have, I think, allowed ourselves to drift into asserting that a woman is as good as a man without always pushing to think what exactly we mean by this. So here's this language thing, right?
Yeah.
What, she said, I feel we ought to mean is something so obvious that it's apt to escape attention altogether. And that is that a woman is just as much an ordinary human being as a man with the same individual preferences, with just as much right to the tastes and preferences of individuals. What is repugnant to every human being is to be reckoned always as a member of a class and not as an individual person. She wrote that in a book, in an essay called "Are Women Human?"
Yeah.
What goes through your mind when you hear that there's this whole, I mean, here's this thing too. They're like, well, that's the man's job, or I think maybe, I know we're moving forward a little bit here, but language is so important, right? That
it is.
Is pastoral, are we talking about things that have been feminized or masculinized? I don't even know if that's the word.
Well,
when really we need to come back to the essence of what it means to be human. Because I think from a faith perspective, I think from a gospel perspective, that Jesus came to reveal to us a new way of being human in everything that he did, and the countercultural, subversive way that he treated everyone from kings to lepers, men and women, Jew and Gentile, everything. It was incredibly human above all.
Yes, absolutely. And I think, yes, it's remiss for us to go either way and swing wrongly, to put a demarcation between the genders or races or sexual preference, whatever it is.
Yeah.
But I think interesting, even with language, like in the Bible, the fact that we're sons and daughters, but it's all sons, and like I read that, and for a long time I would in my head picture a male when I was thinking about scripture, which is crazy as a female. A man shall not this, or a man does that. And I just think of a man. And as women, we were like, okay, that's cool. So I know when it's sons, it means sons and daughters. We know that. Yeah. However, that still persists even in all the modern translations within scripture per se. So language is important. I think also there's a woman from New Zealand called Denise Jordan. She wrote a book called The Forgotten Feminine, absolutely outstanding, and you read it, and I would encourage everyone to grab it and read it, talking about God the Mother and the feminine heart of God. And she pulls apart a lot of the scripture around God made man and woman, he made them in his image, indicating, the female and male part of God, all that stuff, El Shaddai, all that stuff. And the point is that as image bearers, we're created in his image, both male and female, yet scripturally, it's always represented as men or the sons. So language really does matter. So we have that sits in the bedrock of our journey as Christians in our faith. Then we go into the church context. How do we navigate that in our words? I mean, it's not pastorette, like the Bachelorette, So I think there's a space for language to perhaps change there too, to truly represent both male and female, or find a word that isn't loaded with that's gender neutral. Is there some language that has a neutrality to it that's yet to be used? That is a good point around language.
Because again, some of the research that I looked at, London and Wiseman talk about how over the 2,000 years of Christian history, the role of ministers' mates have changed, and it continues to change because this whole idea of what a pastor and a minister is has changed. You mentioned Martin Luther before and his Reformation, and then you had like 1,000 years where ministers were celibate, and they were not married, and if they were for a time, they weren't allowed to have sex, So that was kind of one of these decrees that I remember seeing a joke years ago. Clergy guy goes back into the books and he says, it says celebrate, not celibate. One letter made all the difference. But Nordland says we need to recognize that the early church period, the leaders of the church were men whom we would not designate as laymen. There was no separation as there is now between clergy and laymen. So basically saying, we kind of have this demarcation and hierarchy now anyway, and this is a cultural problem we're living with, and I think what we're talking about becomes a subset issue of that as well, because early church it was just men, and making a separation of class, it was just ministers. There was no professional minister as such. So now we have professional ministers. Here's here's a subset problem. So he says, so if you want to learn from what the Bible, if you want to learn from the Bible what a minister's wife should look like, you must look for references to wives, and you'll find no but double standard for one for pastors' wives and one for the layman's wife, because the two were one. It was kind of, it wasn't about being a minister's wife. It was about this kind of, and I know you really, I think when I came to Encore, the community that you guys led, you worked really hard to try and empower people and really share preaching load and share a lot of, really try and bring in, hey, you're all ministers. And we'll say that from the pulpit, and yet there's still professional leadership roles. And because that has to happen as well. I know in the book of Acts, they argue about who's going to lead the money, who's going to set the tables, who's going to feed the orphans, who's going to preach. So there's always going to be a designation of roles, but we have this hierarchy. And I think as ministers have become professional, they're no longer gender neutral, so to speak. It kind of has this strong thing. But the good and bad news is it's not just happened in the church, right? I mean, I've been watching. I listened to Melinda Gates, Bill Gates's wife.
And
there's a series on Netflix at the moment about Bill Gates' brain or something. And they talk about it there. And she was in a HBR interview as well recently. And she just talked about when they started the Bill Gates Foundation, which was largely one of her passion.
Yes.
All of a sudden it was Bill's eradicating polio, Bill's doing this, Bill's doing that. But he said to her, she said, how come they're always talking about you? And he's like, yeah, that's an issue. He said, but Melinda, you need to want to be in the spotlight. You are going to have to step up. He says, I can't help the way the media portrays it if you're always behind me, because she didn't want that.
No.
Tell me about that, because it's something we chatted about as well.
Yes, absolutely. I think that there is hope that it's not all bad, because ultimately in that story, I listened to that as well. Melinda Gates got in Bill's face and said, firstly, I don't want to be invisible. You maybe don't realise this, honey, but I am being treated as such. What can we do about that? And he said to her, well, it starts with you. And I think for me, in my journey as a female pastor, it came back to it starts with me as well. I had to look at, was I being a victim? Was I sitting in that little martyr space of, oh, I'm invisible again, poor me, go and sit in the corner? Or was I actually going to lead into this space and change stereotypes? And thankfully I chose the latter. And it started with things like, firstly with my husband saying, hey, James, you probably don't even realise, because you're having great chats at these things, but I'm invisible. And I would like you to actually put me forward. So if I'm standing with you in a group and we're chatting and you can see that no one's even looking at me, let alone asking me a question, I'm commissioning you to actually bring me into the conversation. So that was the first thing I did is I actually went, rather than being a martyr and a victim, I guess began to raise this and educate my husband in that space and say, firstly, babe, I need you to help me here. As much as in those conversations myself, I had to also back for myself. So like even on this weekend just gone, I was at a function, and someone asked me a question, and we were talking about interesting things, and it turned to ask me something. And the first thing they asked me was about, oh, so you've got kids. And I thought, wow, there were so many things you could have asked me. Yes, I do have them and I love them, but I'm doing so many interesting things right now. But the only thing you've asked me is about having kids. And that's fine. His wife is a stay-at-home mum, which is fantastic. And that's kind of his paradigm, and that's okay. And again, I've had those seasons, so it's nothing about that. It's more like I have a space where I have to then come back with, yeah, I do have kids, but you know what? I'm doing some interesting things that I think you'd be really interested to hear about. Can I share with you what I've been up to apart from raising 3 amazing kids? So again, I lean into that space, and rather than being grumpy that all he did was ask me about the kids, is acknowledge it. But instead I flipped that around and I went, yeah, I do. However, I think you'd be interested to hear what I'm also doing. So part of that is educating those I'm chatting with, as well as my husband, the men that I speak with, and also educating my son. I've got a son. He's 21. He's about to start law next year. He's very involved in politics. He works for a local MP. He's in this space that could perhaps be seen as misogynistic, whatever you believe in politics. I'm in his space all the time about this. So I'm educating the next generation as well about, hey, listen, what are you doing to promote women, bring women in, even in conversations? Can you bring women forward who's in a conversation with you too? So I'm educating both the husbands, the sons, the other men, and leaders above. And it's important to be able to go to our leaders above us, your senior, if it's not your husband or it's a board, and bring it up. Hey, guys, you probably don't realise, but I feel invisible in these circumstances. How do we as a church change that culture? But, so I think education is massive for us, and language as well. And also something else as part of education is we have to actually bat for other women too. I think...
What does that look like?
So Sheryl Sandberg talks about this in her book, Leaning. It's brilliant.
Sheryl Sandberg is...
Well, she was the CEO of... what was it? Facebook.
Culture, HR and Facebook.
Yeah, all that stuff. I'm not 100% what she's doing now, but she has been, digital marketing and media for many, many years.
Yeah,
and
she
wrote a book called Lean In, and she actually runs these groups, Lean In groups, where women get together in triplets, corporate women meet weekly all around the world to talk about how they're wrestling being seen as invisible amongst other things, which is very interesting. So that she talks about things, just sometimes women don't always back women either, because we're so excited we get noticed that sometimes we can let another sister hang out to dry, because if we fight for her, it might jeopardise our security. And that's important that in any environment that we also bat for our sisters. So if I'm in a conversation and I feel like a sister's getting ignored, I will promote her. I'll be like, hey, John, love what you're saying. My friend, Jane, whatever names, has got a great thoughts around this area. Jane, why don't you share what you know about that? So I also promote other sisters as well as, promoting myself, that we have got equal value and quality to add in that particular conversation. Some of the things I've been doing.
Yeah. And so in some way, Annie, you feel that it's if change was to, as to encourage change, to foster change, you have to be aware of your language.
Yeah, you do.
Women have to be promoting one another.
Yes, yeah.
If they want it, of course.
Yes, true. But it does have to start with us. I think if I helicopter up what I've just said, the overarching theme in that is ultimately this does have to start with us. And I think women have said they felt disempowered. They couldn't bring change in that space.
Yeah.
I can't go to my boss and say, no one sees me. You feel like you're being a tantruming child.
Yeah.
But you know what, as you change your attitude and get braver in that space and go, you know what, I can start by backing myself, because we don't back ourselves. And when we are in strong conversations, quite often we stay silent. We hesitate to cut in or break in. And quite often we say things like, oh, I wonder if, or I'm just wondering. We use language like that, which is soft language, which means I'm not 100% sure if I can say this, but I'm going to maybe put my idea up. So what that does is, a pet, a pet kind of peeve with me is that somebody sprouts off and they go, just saying. And I'm like, say it or don't say it. Don't just say and. Correct. Or don't say something rude or mean and say, just joking. You're not joking. Just call it. Have the guts to
own your voice.
So I think, and I did this when I was when I joined.
But we do it because what? We don't feel confident. We don't feel that you want an out.
Yes, you want an out in case someone is strong back at you, and then you're nervous that maybe you can't hold your own. And that comes also from we haven't always grown up in high confrontational environments. Yeah. And I think, and again, I might be stereotyping, so forgive me if it sounds like this. I think sometimes men are better at doing very strong conflict, not all the time. But I think as women, we're taught to be the peacemakers and be easy. And we're very good at, bringing, sort of more of a docile environment, which is not right. So we're not always able to hold our own in strong face-to-face confrontation. And on a boardroom table or even on a pastor's table, we look at, I was 2 or 3 jobs ago, I met on a weekly pastors table with 4 men and 4 women. And it was actually my issue because these men were brilliant. I did not feel denigrated or not seen, but I felt nervous that if I brought an idea forward, I perhaps couldn't have held my own with a very strong male. Yeah. If I perhaps said, actually, Annie, I don't agree with that. So yes, part of it was giving me an out to say, I wonder, or could it be, or I'm just thinking, but it doesn't actually establish me as a strong woman in her own right. Yeah. So better language is, I strongly feel that, and I would bring my idea forward like that. I'm quite resolved in this idea. Or just using different language when I present my ideas in those environments also establishes me as that I'm actually not the weaker sex here. I'm well and truly on par with everybody here at this table, and I'm not looking for an out. I'm going to back what I'm going to say because I believe what I'm saying is right. Yeah, absolutely. Agreed. I think, to borrow some of Dorothy Sayers' sentiment, it's this: you have to own your humanity. Say that I'm on equal footing here. Yeah. As another human with a voice, right or wrong, but here's what I'm bringing to the table in that as well. That's right. It's important. So, and just to correct, I want to add a caveat to that too. We don't have to match men in their masculinity. It's not what I'm saying either. So no one throw stones at me. I think what we do is we need to be 100% ourselves. Yep. But when you're at home sharing an opinion with your husband, or when you're at home sharing an opinion with your bestie, with your kids, you're fully yourself. You fully back your opinion, right? Yeah. So can you take that woman that you're at home and put her in the pastors' meeting, or in the boardroom, or at the pastors' table, or when you're in your office with your boss and you're wanting to say, hey, I've got something to say. Can we take that same confident woman to those spaces?
Now, if you're coaching somebody in that, I suspect it would be like, you're going to test this out. This is going to feel foreign. Yes. What would you be saying? So let's say somebody's listening, watching. They're totally like, that's exactly what I'm saying. And I mean that not in my, that's not a girl voice. That's like, that's my exclamation.
An excited voice.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, so, that's what I'm trying to say. And how would you coach them? They're like, well, how do I do that?
Yeah. Well, I think probably I'd start with, who are they when they're 100% themselves? Because that is who they need to bring to that space. Yeah. So I would probably start by actually getting to explore who they are. And then, okay, so if, Jane, if you are normally a ballsy woman, how can you be a ballsy woman in that space? What are some of the things that you can do? Yes. To feel confident to act in those particular ways. But if Kate, you're an introverted woman, who is Kate 100% introverted in that space? And what would you feel comfortable, to do, bring that forward? So we workshop around communication, obviously tools and things like that. But so much of it comes back to when you walk into that room, that you step into that room, and almost as you step in, you step into your confident, bravest self. Yeah. You don't step in with an expectation that you're going to be not seen, that you're going to be ignored. Because that, once you have that mindset, it's all over, Red Rover. You can't go expecting to be dismissed, because you know what? You will be. Yeah, you're seeing Melinda Gates, right? One of the world's richest people, one of the world's, they're both incredibly clever and smart in their own right. And she's not seen. No, which is hilarious. Yeah. Well, Sheryl Sandberg talked about in her book, Leaning, that she'll go to a workshop and the facilitator will say, all right, we're not going to take any questions at the end of this workshop because I've got to catch a plane. And everyone nods their head, right? No questions. The facilitator finishes the workshop, 5 men put their hands up and ask questions, and no women do. Because the men are like, yeah, we heard that, but we want to ask something. Whereas the women, they obey the rules, and they don't, because they honour the fact that person's got to catch a plane. It's not an interesting dynamic, So what would happen if we honoured the plane trip but still went, you know what, I know you've got to go, but I've got one question. Could we do that? And if we don't, why don't we? So it's definitely about confidence and owning that back in yourself space, I think. That reminds me of some a bit of a digression, but in a similar vein. Within organizational leadership and the study of those things, we look at people like Bill George talked about being an authentic leader and being yourself, be yourself. Yes.
people like Hermione Ibarra and Goffey and Jones, these kind of gurus and critiques in that kind of area, sort of says, well, being yourself, which self? Which self should I be?
Yes.
Goffey and Jones said, be yourself more skillfully. They just said, if you just add 2 words, don't finish at be yourself more, but be yourself more skillfully. Good leaders, authentic leaders, know deep in the core who they are, and yet they're able to go, all right, what does this audience need right now? Somebody that's self-aware, has good emotional intelligence, can put on any coat and any jacket for that audience. So do I need to be strong and assertive in this meeting? Well, I can be. I know I can, because I put that one on at home when I tell the kids, just I don't care what you put on your feet, put something on your feet and get in the car. You're like, we know how to put that on.
Sure do.
My wife does it. We know how to do that.
We do.
Yet, and that is a self. Can you bring that self to the boardroom? Well, maybe you can, and maybe you should. So but the question is skillfully, and some of the great suggestions is you should try it on. I think about, like, you look at Joseph in the Bible, tries on a coat, tries on, he's always changing his garb. He's in a prison, he's in Pharaoh's house, he's in Potiphar's house. He's like, a senator or prime minister. He would have been in Egyptian garb. He tries that on. He's willing to change, but he still stays authentically himself. You see, though, like David goes to fight Goliath, Saul pulls the armor on him, and he's like, this doesn't really fit me. At least he's tried it on. It's not like, no, I don't wear that. I'm a shepherd. That is not like me. No, that's called rigidity. We need to be able to, I think, this is a leadership lesson for everybody, is be able to have, if you want to use Susan David's term, emotional agility, but more than that, a sense of authentic. I'm going to be myself more skillfully, and do I need to change my skills? How do I take responsibility for that? And I'd say the same to pastors and leaders who are, and I meet them, young pastors and leaders who may have taken over organizations, churches, where it's kind of been the boys' club, and they're deeply aware that, why are there no women on leadership here? What's going on? And you need to be able to have those discussions. I think you need to be able to point them out. I think it just needs to concern you, not to say we definitely need more women on the board, but the question is, what sort of people do we need on this board? They may happen to be women. So I don't think, as Dorothy Sayers says, let's talk about it from a humanity perspective, not a class and gender perspective. Who are the best kind of humans to have in this organization, in these positions, and just hold it at the deepest core of an included, reconciled humanity, and let that aesthetic, or what that looks like, be what it is, regardless of whether it's male or female, bond or free, black or white, whatever we kind of want to frame that up as. But you do have to push against the norm, and you're going to have some resistance. You just got to expect it. And if there's no resistance, you probably aren't pushing hard enough, or you should have made the changes a long time ago.
I agree. Yeah. And my statement sounds harsh, but in some ways we accidentally do enable this a little bit.
I think so.
So, I can see in my own life, I totally enabled this. So there's no judgment on anybody who struggles to speak up, or has a go and fails, or in that last minute, just backs out, puts the reverse lights on and, gets out of there. Because it's a practice thing, and you do have hits and misses. And sometimes, like any new skill, the pendulum swings severely the other way.
Yeah, I've done that.
Yeah, you get too strident, and nobody wants a strident woman in their face, right?
Or strident any person,
or any person,
male or female. I don't think it's becoming of humans, really, to have this.
So I think it's about, because recognize when you stop being yourself and start trying to be someone else, that's a problem also. Don't do that, because your design and your unique wiring is exactly what God wants from you in that space. Just wants you to be 100% you in that space.
Yeah.
Backing yourself.
And I think this is where some of the inner work, some things that I used to work with people on, and the space you move people into now, is learning who their authentic self is, and then being able to put on any code at any time for what's needed and what's necessary as leaders, in their own right, within organizations, right? That it's, you got to know who you are. If you don't, you're going to be, really know who you are. Spend the time, spend the years, walk with a great, Daniel Goleman's, the guru, emotional intelligence guru on this, really pushes hard on, you've got to have self-awareness, and all the emerging research study stuff you're learning at university today in this area is we need leaders who are more human.
Yes.
Male or female. The idea is, your humanity, know your core values, know what you stand for, know what you don't, know what deeply matters to you, live an integrated life.
Yes.
Be yourself more skillfully, continually learn and grow, try different things.
Yeah.
It's super, super important. I reckon we should wrap things up with kind of a final question here. We've gone for an hour. I told you it would go quick.
Oh, gosh, I thought it was about 20 minutes in.
It does.
Yes.
Where do we go from here? It's a question that anyone watching or listening, I'm keen to know. We're both keen to know.
Yeah.
What you think a way forward is, what some of the big problems and some of the big questions are. I think, we need to be asking more intelligent questions, perpetual questions in this area. What are your thoughts on that as well, Annie?
I think so. I think just to use your metaphor of Bible characters putting things on, we read that God put Gideon on like a glove. And I think sometimes if we can realize that Holy Spirit, God in us, Emmanuel, if we can adapt that we are 100% ourselves, fully with God, if we realize that when we step into the situations, you know what, I'm going in and God is fully in me. Yeah. I'm the Gideon, God is fully in me. That's where the confidence comes from, to be doing all the self-work. But if we approach those potentially scary moments where we have to lean in, to remember that, Holy Spirit in us is greater. And when we are fully immersed in that, we'll have the confidence to be fully ourselves as well. So I think attitude and mindset is really, really key. Yeah. I think also discernment is a big one. Picking your battles, all that stuff's pretty key as well. Some battles aren't worth fighting. So maybe the questions are, is this battle in this situation right now the right battle to fight? I mean in the minutiae. Like, someone walks past you and shakes your husband's hand, doesn't look you in the face. There is a moment of is this a battle worth fighting right now?
Yeah. Or are you just a dick that's not going to change?
And
are you just small-minded? Are you stuck in that? Is that just a bad habit? Can be a million things, but good question. Is that actually worth it? Is
it worth it?
Is it me trying to make a point here, chase that man or woman's attention? Because it could be a woman who's gone and who's a strong woman in ministry organization and goes straight to shake the man's hand.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
You can't make the assumption that it's just male leaders who only shake men's hands. It's across the board.
No, 100%. I think absolutely. I think it doesn't matter who's coming towards you. If you're sensing that you're not being seen. So great question is this a battle worth fighting? And then I think also I do tend to go back to God. Is this my stuff? Or is this legitimately the issue of not being seen? Yeah, good. Because sometimes, we get these senses about things. It's actually it's our junk. So I always check in on that stuff too. Like, am I just...
Is this a pattern? Hang on. At every crime scene, there's a common denominator. It's me.
Maybe it's me. It could be
a crime scene investigation. What's the common metric here every time this happens?
Maybe I don't, read personal space and I'm leaning in too close. Maybe he's backing off because my breath stinks and I've been fasting, haven't eaten, whatever. I don't know, too many coffees. Yep. I think there's always a good point of checking in on yourself as well.
Great.
Because sometimes I've gone to meetings. I remember I tend to be the other. I've gone to a meeting and I've gone, everyone seems funny here, and and I've thought maybe it's me, and God's gone, no, there's something going on here. So okay, good, that's discernment. Other times I've gone to a meeting and I thought everything seems funny here, and God's going, no, that's you're overtired, you're paranoid, you're not, whatever it is.
You've got the POV, I call them the piss off vibes, that somebody comes to you and they feel the vibes that just they don't want you to be near them.
Right, whatever it is, So I think, is this a battle worth fighting? that's probably number one. Secondly, is this your stuff?
Yeah.
Rearing its head. And if not, then maybe there is a question mark around what's authentic to me in going into bat for this.
Great.
And to answer a question asked before, if I was coaching someone, I'd want to figure out what's their values as well. What are your values? And my values that I expect to be seen and noticed and respected. Then if that's a value for me and I'm being ignored, then my value does demand that I act in this situation. If my value is not that, it's something else. My value is to be someone that walks around the back of the room and prays for the meeting, which a lot of people do. Then that's okay that I'm not being seen. So what's my core values as me as a person? Those things are important, Yeah. What about you? When you're someone on the other side of this in the organisational cultures, what are the questions that you ask the organisation in this space?
Yeah, well, I mean, I've sat with organisations before and just kind of said, hey, there's no kind of women on the board, or, is there a reason? I'm looking for kind of a response to go, oh, yeah, we've asked some, or just doesn't work. Sometimes very practical and pragmatic. Sometimes it's seasonal. Sometimes it is theological, and then that is what it is. I think I'm going to say this: if women find themselves in a church which has a very strong kind of theological bent to women taking a particular place within the church and the home, etc., I'm going to suspect generally, by and large, that you being part of that and your husband being okay with that you actually don't want a voice at the board either. Mm-hmm. And so the answer's simple. We don't, because we don't, Mm-hmm. That's just the culture has informed that this is the way boardrooms, leadership, etc. looks like. So the big question is like, are the right people in the right positions? Mm-hmm. Are you shortchanging yourself or not representing over half your congregation? Let's remember, most churches are predominantly female. Yeah. So not to have that is there. I mean, there are some different, in my research in sort of prepping for this, I found some interesting things, and I might be wrong, but I couldn't find, and people had made commentary on this, I couldn't find a single large church in the world, in the Western world at least, America, Australia, New Zealand, that had a woman as a senior leader at the helm. So there's not. Any big mega church always has a man at the helm.
Yeah.
And, we look at things in Australia like Hillsong. Bobby's very upfront. Donna Crouch is very upfront. So they have a strong female. Darlene Check, extremely upfront as a worship leader. And Darlene and her husband pastor a church now somewhere in New South Wales. And is it as big as Hillsong? No, it's not. And, so it shouldn't just be, about interesting. All that said, what is interesting is that there seems to be that's just a norm, and we can ask why, but it just happened to be something that came out as an observation in the midst of that. So the question for me is going to be to senior leaders: do you want this to change? And what's it going to take to change? Should it change? Is this an issue? Are there, because it can kind of guarantee that if there is kind of a remnant of a boys' club or something like that in a church, you can almost guarantee a couple of things. Number one, that's never been investigated and challenged. Number two, you have just really insecure men at the helm that only know how to do this with men, because what I've noticed is that, secure men, secure in who they are, secure in their faith, can even secure in their relationship with their wives, if they're married, can lead anybody. Yeah. It's about leading the best kind of human for that season, and the role and the mission and the vision and the purpose in that, male or female. It just kind of doesn't matter. That's not really the question. But then so that's what we look on at organizationally. If this comes up is a question, because if somebody is if a people group are underrepresented in leadership, it always flows down. Everybody knows what that looks like. You know? And in some ways, if you take kind of Daniel Pink's sort of idea on the way the world is going. We're becoming very, very global, but we're also becoming very tribal as a people as well. And if there's just one chief male at the top of that tribe, he's the elder, then what is that? That is always going to leak down. And so there might be a great sense of security and safety with that. So, I mean, there are just some fascinating things. Could a woman, I think it'd be great with the day that comes when in Pentecostal evangelical circles, and I know there's people like, what's her name? The American lady had like lots of...
Joyce Meyer. I knew what you were trying to say. Yes.
You know, or Beth Moore, great big voices, but they've built big ministries, but not large, super large congregations. If there is, it's a minority. I'm waiting for those days where I don't know if we'll see it in my lifetime. And so you've got to be aware of the culture that you're in. But today, like, we have women prime ministers, women, you know, Queen of England. I mean, it's not as if, I think the argument is, can women be in leadership anymore and lead and run and grow large organizations? You know, that's not even a question anymore.
No, it shouldn't be.
So when is that going to translate into church or, you know, or things outside of that? That'll be interesting to do, because of course that's informed it, even in Denise Jordan's book. And so some of the sermon I preached for many years on the feminine nature of God, really, you look at the masculine culture of the days of our church fathers that informed how we read and interpreted scripture. Everyone from Origen to Tertullian, all these guys had in their commentaries some really misogynistic, nasty. I had women cry in the congregation listening to this, realizing, man, this is a cancer that has infiltrated scriptures and interpretation, and we're still doing it today. And unless you're very, 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 very aware of it, we're always going to be part of our culture. But to shift that, we're going to have to change our language, rites and rituals, heroes that we have, and stories that we tell. That's anthropologically most cultures are built off. The heroes, the stories that we tell, the language we use, and the rites and rituals we have. So churches can make more progressive. Just make sure a woman's on roster to preach equally. You know, there's things that I think churches and organizations can do. Just make sure there's equal footing there. If you might have 5 people to choose from who are great preachers, and you know, just make it even. I think if you want to bring a shift around and increase kind of the view and perspective, have it there. And you might have men that say women shouldn't preach, etc. Well, those men can find another church that believes that other thing. If you really, you know, let them go. You know, I've watched men leave boards and churches because they didn't think a woman could be an elder in a church. That was their theological belief. So they were released. Go away. Go and find somewhere that fits in with what you believe. No hard feelings. This is just not the place for you. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. So if you intentionally shift those things, people will be uncomfortable. But if you want to do it, it can be done. So So Annie, if people want to get in contact with you, tell me about your kind of ideal sort of people you'd like to help and how they can do that.
Yeah, so basically, I just want to be able to be available for people to come and chat through what they're going through. And it can be anything through leadership, through to personal, holistically. I offer coaching and supervision. You can jump on my website, annielayton.com. That's it, just .com. And there's an info section there. You can put your details in. I've got blogs there that I'm writing. My blogs are called Things Pastors Wish They Could Say.
I've been sharing them. I've loved them.
Yeah. I'm just going there. I'm just saying all the things that you love to say, but you can't because you're running a church. So I've got that privileged space that I no longer run a church, so I'm saying them. And but my driver behind that is to just open conversations where we can be truly honest with where we're at. And that's sort of the goal. If you catch up with me, I can do Zoom sessions or meet in person, whatever it looks like. Just jump online on my website, and if you want to contact me that way. I'm open and happy to do that. What about you, Dave?
Well, my time's kind of limited, and I don't have kind of any set client structure anymore because I've kind of moved away from that space. My wife is an exceptional counselor. So if conversations people have had today that triggered, women are like, oh, no, maybe my wife's knows what it's like to be the pastor's wife, knows what it's like to be seen as invisible. She's a trained counselor. She says it as it is. And she can see people all over the world on Zoom by video as a counselor. She's a registered and trained counselor. So if you go to leaderheart, or one word, leaderheart.org, I'll put all the websites in the show notes or whatever that is. You can go there and book an appointment to see Natalie. And if you want to get in contact with me, maybe you're a leader or pastor, or you run an organization and you like what I said and want to just let's have a conversation and see if I can help you. Some of my time and services are limited, but always happy to have a chat, and if I can help you, to steer you in the right direction. And I keep a blog at davidtensen.com, or email me at davidtensen@gmail.com as well. So,
and can I highly recommend, as someone who's had multiple sessions with Dave, I highly recommend that. So get on and contact you and get them going, because they're quite life-changing. So
thanks. Thanks, Sandy. Yeah. Well, we are hoping that if people have watched this, listened to this, however you've consumed it, if you've liked this, Annie and I may make more. It's really dependent on you. So we need to know if what we've said is helpful, has mattered to you. If you have any questions or comments, we'd love to hear. We'd like to know from you where you see this whole thing going, the stuff that we're talking about. How have you maybe resolved being invisible? Maybe you feel like that. Do get in contact and leave comments. Let us know whether we keep doing these things. This is our pilot show. It always goes for longer, right?
That's right.
We're not leaving you on a hanger, but there's a lot of things we can kind of discuss from our space and place now and our experience, decades in this space. I like to finish on, I think Natalie's supervisor said to her once, as we were working pretty heavily in the ministry / counseling / leadership space, or what happens under hood, her supervisor said, Natalie, you know that it doesn't get any messier than this, because we're working in the church and ministry space has some immense complexities, as there's this murky merge of spiritual community work, home, faith, everything. It's just very politics, everything. It's just messy. So get help, friends, get help and be part of some meaningful conversations is what I would recommend. Yeah,
absolutely.
Thanks, Annie. Any closing thoughts or things from yourself?
No, I think I'll save I've got things to say for the next time.
Oh, okay.
Yes, we've got lots to say, people. So if you can give us some feedback on this, we'll jump into our next topics, because Dave and I have plenty of things to share. So let us know what you think. That's my final comment.
All right. Thanks, everyone. See you later.
See ya. Bye.